This is Jamie Drummond for Good Food Revolution. I am joined by a gentleman from not so far away from the Finger Lakes. We are speaking with Fred Frank, joining us from Dr. Frank Winery in the Finger Lakes. How are you today, sir?
I'm well, Jamie. Thanks so much for having me on your program.
Well, a real pleasure to have you join us. Now, how is the weather right now in the Finger Lakes? How is the bud break and all of that?
It's really a glorious spring day here. Beautiful sunny weather, nice dry temperatures in the 70s to 80s. Really just a beautiful day, and the buds are sprouting. So it's really a wonderful time for us.
An exciting time of year because you can see the nascent potential of the harvest, right?
Exactly. The buds are opening, and soon the shoots will be growing, and we're looking forward to a wonderful growing season.
Excellent. Now we are here to speak about the Grüner Veltliner 2019, which is actually launched tomorrow, I think, in Ontario. But for those people unfamiliar with your winery, would you mind giving us a potted history of what you're doing there in the Finger Lakes?
Yes, of course. It's a fantastic history. The winery was started by my grandfather, and his name was Konstantin Frank. So the winery and the labels are named in his honor. And he was also a PhD in viticulture. So the label actually says Dr. Konstantin Frank. I'll hold the bottle up here.
There we go. Yeah.
And this is the wine available, the 2019 Grüner Veltliner from Dr. Konstantin Frank. So he was a true pioneer in the eastern United States, in that he was the first to introduce the noble Vitis vinifera. So the vinifera are, of course, the European species
Yes.
of grapevines grown throughout the world and making, great wines from Australia to, of course, Europe and the New World, as well in California. But they were not grown in the eastern United States until Konstantin came on the scene back in 1951. He immigrated with his whole family from Europe. And his PhD thesis was techniques for growing Vitis vinifera in a cold climate. So he had the perfect background coming to New York, where there is and was a very large wine industry and vineyard acreage. However, it was all devoted to the Vitis labrusca.
Yes.
And a few French hybrids. These were crosses between the vinifera and the labrusca. And so there had been many attempts to grow them, all the way going back to Thomas Jefferson at his estate in Virginia, to try to grow the vinifera, and all attempts were unsuccessful. And most of the naysayers said that it was too cold to grow vinifera in New York State. So Konstantin set out to prove the industry and the experts that they were incorrect. And there were several reasons for failure. Number one was phylloxera. So our region, the eastern US, is kind of the epicenter of phylloxera worldwide. That's our contribution to world viticulture.
I was about to say that's your contribution to wine culture all over the world.
Exactly. So this is really the epicenter of phylloxera. So what happened in the early, 1900, well, actually early 1900s, the phylloxera spread from the eastern US to Europe by accident. With the advent of the steamship, the crossing was short enough that the little bugs survived the crossing and spread like wildfire in the vineyards of France and Germany and throughout Europe, because the vinifera were planted on their own roots. And the phylloxera, this was like a smorgasbord for them, so they just spread. And so it was the European scientists that came up with the idea of using the wild vines from the eastern US that evolved to be resistant to this pest, and grafting what they call rootstock, or cuttings from these wild vines in the eastern U.S. onto the European vinifera vines, and thus they were able to now coexist with the phylloxera in the soils without doing damage to the roots of the vine. And this was a great natural approach, and it was effective. And Konstantin was one of the scientists that perfected this grafting technique, and then he brought those techniques with him back to the New World and of course New York State. There were other reasons for failure as well. One of them was the cold weather, and that was the danger was reduced by planting in the best microclimates in the area, which were along the shores of these very deep finger lakes.
Yeah.
So these lakes moderated the winter temperature to allow the more tender vinifera to grow. So we can't grow the vinifera away from these deep lakes in our region, the Finger Lakes, because the winters are too cold. But along the shorelines, because the lakes are so deep, for example, Seneca Lake is over 600 feet deep. Imagine that. So it really moderates, the surrounding temperature. You have a similar moderation with Lake Ontario, and Niagara-on-the-Lake region benefits from that water relationship. And we have it to a lesser extent with the Finger Lakes. They're smaller lakes, but very much deeper than even Lake Ontario. So it allows us to grow the more tender vinifera, such as Grüner Veltliner, which is, on the spectrum of winter hardiness, is not as hardy as some of the others like Riesling, for example, and Cabernet Franc. Those vinifera are hardier. They can withstand colder winters. Grüner Veltliner is what we call a bit more tender, and it requires a better microclimate in order to survive the winters.
Now, Riesling would be seen as being your flagship grape in the Finger Lakes,
Yes.
but I'm intrigued as to Grüner Veltliner. I believe you kind of fell in love with it when you were studying at Geisenheim in the 80s.
That's correct. Although back then, the Germans and the Austrians, they have a bit of rivalry. So at least when I was studying there, they didn't grow any Gruner in Germany. The way I was exposed is I had relatives in Austria, in Baden by Wien, which is a suburb of Vienna. And in order to get there, I had to go through this wine town called Gumpelskirchen, which is famous for Grüner Veltliner. And I stopped in the pubs there and the Weinstube, and I just fell in love with the Grüner. So when I came back from my studies, I convinced my dad, let's give it a try. Konstantin had never grown it, even though he had 60 vinifera varieties on his Keuka vineyards, which is our home farm and where the winery is located, Keuka Lake. But that lake, being only 200 feet deep, didn't afford us, the winter temperatures to grow the Gruner, and Konstantin knew that. So we didn't start the Gruner plantings till we started a satellite vineyard on Seneca Lake in Hector. And this region is affectionately called the banana belt of the Finger Lakes because it's the southeast corner. It's thought to be the mildest climate within the Finger Lakes region. And so we have a beautiful vineyard site, nice sloping soils, nice, beautiful slopes close to the deepest portion of the lake. And so in 2007 is where we did our first Gruner plantings. Now, in comparison, at the home farm on Keuka, Konstantin did his first plantings in 1958. So you can see there's quite a time span there. But we were really excited about Gruner. I believe we have the largest planting, in the eastern United States. It's quite a sizable amount. And so I've really been on a mission promoting Gruner, particularly with its wonderful food pairing abilities. I think it's just a fantastic food pairing wine. And, you know, I was quite ambitious with our vineyards because I assumed that the market would explode for Gruner. I wouldn't call it an explosion. I would call it a slow immersion.
Yes,
And you know, it's people like yourselves, wine educators, producers like me. You know, we're out there in educating folks about the merits of Gruner. Now, one thing I have to say, the wine market, which you probably noticed, has really embraced, you know, sort of esoteric varieties. I guess you could lump this together. These are varieties beyond Chardonnay. You know, we have this movement in the US called ABC,
of
anything
course,
but
yeah.
Chardonnay. And years ago, let's say 20 years ago, the wine market was very different. It was about what people were comfortable with, what they could pronounce. And so it was much more limited in what wine consumers were enjoying. And Chardonnay, Merlot were two of the big ones.
Oh,
That were,
probably because they were the easiest to pronounce, Fred.
I think that's part of it, yes. And you know, today the wine market has just changed so much, and
Yes.
we're really well positioned because Konstantin was like the champion of the underappreciated vinifera varieties from around the world, and you know, Gruner could be added to that list. So it's really been great to see this explosion of interest among wine consumers, you know, learning about different wines from all over the world. We also have some Georgian varieties that we're very
Oh,
bullish on, like Arquetzatelli, Saperavi, for example. And again, they do well in our cool climate. But getting back to the Gruner, I'm just so excited about the interest, and also that we have it now available to our fans in the Canada and the LCBO market. And it's just a great wine. And what we found is consumers are shortening it, and it's kind of cool to go in a wine bar and say, "I'd like a glass of Gruner," you
yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and then you know, Psalms know what you want, and it's really a variety that I feel is going to continue to increase the awareness, and we're just very excited about the potential for it.
Now, I'm curious, I have a question for you. In its homeland of Austria, uh, Gruner tends to make the best wines on sandy alluvial soil. What kind of soil types are we talking about in your Seneca estate?
Right. Well, the soils are, I wouldn't call them sandy, but they're deep loam soils. So they're very
Right.
well draining, and that's, you know, a similarity with sandy soils. So that we would call them a deep loam soil. In Austria would be the Federspiel. I'm told that the style of Gruner, and I would agree with that. It's more of that style from
The
the region.
Federspiel style, I understand. Yes,
Federspiel.
yes, yes.
Yes.
So how would you describe what appears in the glass, if we're comparing it to a Federspiel? How would you describe what appears in the glass from the very unique terroir? Actually, let me rephrase that, from the unique terroir that one finds at the Seneca estate.
Well, I think 2019 is a great vintage for the Gruner,
Mhm.
because it's a very typical vintage of the Finger Lakes. We had a late bud start, bud break, and it was a cooler growing season followed by a nice warm fall.
I see.
So the end result is a really nice balanced Gruner with a nice crisp acidity, really great fruit flavors. You know, you pick up some lime, green apple, and some stony minerality, and it touches with like pepper on the finish. And this is a wine that would really go well, of course, with asparagus, different cheeses, you know, pork, grilled or fried, scallops,
Yeah.
sushi, Thai cuisine. So it really is a very, very flexible, you know, in terms of the food pairing. And I think that's the beauty of Gruner is this affinity to pair with many different types of foods and cuisine.
Excellent. Well, I'm looking forward. I was hoping to get a bottle to taste today, but that was not to be.
Oh
But
no. Can I just send it over to you now?
yeah, I wish it were that
For...
easy, Fred. I wish it were that easy. Thank you so much for joining us at Good Food Revolution today. I'm going to pick up some of that wine tomorrow, and I'll send you an email with my thoughts on it as soon as I get a chance to taste it.
Oh, that would be great. Just so your viewers are aware, this wine really scored very well. 91 points with decanter and 90 points with wine enthusiast.
Oh.
And we have a New York competition called the New York Wine Classic. It was picked as the best Grüner Veltliner in the entire state in 2020. So, this wine really has done well with the critics, and I hope you enjoy it as well when you taste it.
Superb. Thank you very much for joining us at Good Food Revolution, Fred. And we'll speak again soon. Perhaps we'll see you in Ontario, or we'll make it down to the Finger Lakes.
That would be wonderful. Thanks so much, Jamie.
Take care. Bye for now.